Latin word order. We're told it's flexible, and this flexibility gives the ability to emphasize certain words above others. But if that's the case, that means that there must be some kind of a default word order, right? A neutral word order, a normal word order. Well, what is that in Latin? For example, arcus in hortis publicis sunt. Or could it be in hortis publicis sunt arcus, or sunt in hortis publicis arcus? Which is the right word order? Is one of these actually the normal neutral word order? We're going to explore that today. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. This video is brought to you by the Ancient Language Institute, where we teach you in Latin, in Ancient Greek, in Hebrew, and in Old English. That's right, we teach you not just to be fluent readers, but also to learn the basics of conversation in these languages. And why do we do that? So that you can actually become better readers. That's right, if you know how to express yourself a little bit, you understand how to discuss what you're reading in Latin, in Ancient Greek, and Old English, and Hebrew, well then you're going to be a much better reader of those languages. We've proven it again and again.
And if you already know some of these languages, but you want to advance, you want to finally become a fluent reader, then our intermediate and advanced classes, or perhaps our tutoring sessions, can help you out. Sign up by April 12th for the summer session at ancientlanguage.com.
Eventually, questions like word order will become intuitive to you. So, about that question of arcus, right? So the arches are in the park, right? Park. Horti publici. It's plural because, why not? Arcus are plural. Arcus sunt in hortis publicis. If we want to use the most default kind of word order, well, we do like to have the verb at the end. We like to have the subject at the beginning. So we might say that arcus in hortis publicis sunt. That could be a very neutral word order. But what about the placement of the adjective and the noun? And well, there's more to discuss.
And let's start with the verb, because the verb is doubtless the most important part of any sentence, especially in Latin, because Latin's what's called a pro-drop language. It doesn't need to have pronouns like I or you, he, she, it, etc. So we can get away with just the verb as a whole sentence. Take this. Transit. He crossed, or she crossed. We need some more information and some more context to make this actually, interesting, which we'll add in a second, but transit, that is a whole sentence. Well, who is it that went across? Maybe a plane or maybe a mountain, we don't know yet, and we're going to use servilius. Servilius transit. So these are the two fulcra, if you will, of the whole sentence. The end of the sentence in the most unmarked word order is indeed the verb, but the beginning of the sentence, again, in the most unemphasized sort of sentence, is the subject. So we have servilius transit. Okay, but what is it that he crossed? Let's have him cross a river. Servilius flumen transit. So direct objects, we can see they go in the middle. Servilius flumen transit. Subject, object, verb. That is indeed the most basic order. But there's more. There are indirect objects. There are adverbs. There are complements to the subject. Where do they go? And complements to the objects, direct and indirect. Well, let's add some more information. Let us make Servilius a consul. So he is the consul, Consul Servilius. These kinds of titles and other attributes to the subject, they usually go after, especially if they're not being marked. Servilius consul. That just means Servilius, the consul. Whereas if we put consul first, consul Servilius, that's marked. And what that usually suggests is when Servilius was a consul, so as a consul, when he was a consul, Servilius did all these things. And that might be true as well, but that's emphasizing a subtle shade of meaning that's a little bit different. We just want unmarked, Servilius the consul, Servilius consul. Okay, so that goes right with him, right with the subject. Could it go elsewhere in the sentence? Absolutely. And in poetry, we see a lot more flexibility and creativity because poetry, even more than prose, is doing all kinds of things for emphasis, for de-emphasis, for artistic and creative highlighting of this or that, and it's fantastic. So poetry is amazing, and prose can be quite artistic too, but in order to appreciate all those shades of emphasis and meaning, it's important to understand this default kind of word order. So, Servilius consul flumen transit. Now, maybe some other people went with him, maybe all of his forces. Servilius consul cum omnibus copiis flumen transit. And we can already see in English, we wouldn't like to use an order like this. We would say Servilius, or the consul, in fact, Consul Servilius, crosses the river with all of his forces. We need that verb to be pretty close to the second position in the sentence. That's very typical of a lot of languages, certainly Germanic languages, in unmarked statements. But not in Latin. In Latin, that verb should come towards the end. Servilius consul, cum omnis copiis, flumen transit. Okay, well, that's good. What about the way that he crossed the river? Was it lente or was it quito? Maybe quam celerrime, as quickly as possible. Servilius consul cum omnibus copiis flumen quam celerrime transit. Servilius, Consul Servilius, crosses as fast as possible. He crosses the river as fast as possible with his forces, with all of his forces. Note that words that denote quantity, like omnis, or numbers and things like that, they tend to precede. They are adjectival, but they tend to precede the noun. So hence omnibus copiis. Could you have copiis omnibus? Yes, Latin does have that flexibility, but the more default position is usually there. We're looking for these tendencies. These are not quite rules, but they're close, especially since we're talking about unmarked preferences, unemphasized preferences. Okay, well, that's it, right? So we have the subject is going to be the beginning, and the verb is going to be at the end. We have the complements to the subject that are going to be close to the subject right after it. We're going to then have the direct object, it being the river in this case, flumen, and then the adverb is as close to the verb as possible because it's describing the verb. Celerrime, quam celerrime, right? Well, we can also have a connector from a previous sentence. In fact, Latin, unlike English, tends to prefer having connector words such as and, then, therefore, much more frequently than we do in English. And if you know ancient Greek, you know ancient Greek loves that even more than Latin, those connecting words like guy and de and min and so forth. But Latin, we usually like to have some kind of connecting word. And in that case, where does it go? It goes right before the subject. So the main fulcrum is going to be, well, the main the most primary fulcrum is the verb at the end. But then you have the subject, but right before the subject will be these connecting words. So let's say the following morning, postero diae mane, Servilius consul, quo omnibus copiis, flumen quam celerrime transit. Now, this is an example I actually took from North and Hillard. North and Hillard, among others, wrote these great composition books. And in fact, all of this information that I'm telling you about today, I took from a webpage that was written by a fellow who goes by Carolus Raeticus, who compiled all this information. And I definitely recommend you go to this specific webpage, which will be linked in the description, and to his website, where he puts so many useful things, especially old books, ways to learn Latin, a little bit on ancient Greek. It's all there, and he's just go and enjoy it. Go and download the amazing things he put there. Now, the page where he took extracts of prose composition books from the 19th and early 20th century, it is a lot of material, and I found it hard to concentrate. So for myself, I wanted to make an audiobook so I could just listen to it or read along with it. It helps me to have a voice, even if it's my own, just to carry me through long texts sometimes, even in English, to say nothing of Latin and ancient Greek. And for that reason, I recorded an audiobook for myself, and if you want it, you can also get that at my audiobook store. But of course, the original webpage put together by Carolus Raeticus is right there for you. You don't need my audiobook, but if you want to have someone pronouncing the Latin sentences for you, or if you want to listen to it in the car or when you're doing chores, that's what I like to do, then you have that available at lukeranieri.com. So here is my synthesis of reading all that, what the default word order could be. These are all the positions that could be filled. Think of them as like variables in an algebra equation. The first thing are connecting words, including place, time, cause, or means. That may or may not be there. The next thing could be there for sure is the subject, followed by the attributes of the subject, adjectives that describe the subject or things that go with the subject, followed then by an indirect object, if the sentence has one, attributes of the indirect object. Then the direct object, that's right, usually we expect the indirect object and then the direct object, and then the verb towards the end in Latin. Ancient Greek actually prefers the indirect object closer to the verb, but we'll talk more about that when we do Ancient Greek word order, which will be in another video. So the indirect object and the attributes that go with the indirect object, then the direct object, attributes that go with the direct object, and then adverbs or adverbial expressions that qualify the verb or the predicate, and then finally the verb or the predicate. The predicate could be just the entire verb. So that is the default word order. Based on that, I have written my own little sentence here that puts all of that into practice. So, ea nocte, there's the time expression. Carolus, here's the subject. Poeta magni genii, a poet of great genius, right? Lesbiae suae, to his lesbia. Mulieri formosae, being a beautiful woman. Carmen, the direct object. Breve, adjective describing the direct object. Sed bellum, also describing the Carmen. Quito, adverb describing the verb. Scripsit. Ea nocte Carolus, poeta magni ingenii, lesbiae suae, mulieri formosae, Carmen breve, sed bellum, Quito scripsit. Now, this sentence could be improved in a lot of ways, especially if it's in the context of other sentences, because this is the default word order that we're interested in talking about here. If we have other sentences that follow, sentences that precede, all kinds of other effects about which you can learn on that webpage that I talked about, put together by Carolus Raeticus, can be applied to improve the sentence. For example, if you have a number of relative clauses, then, well, of course, at the end of the relative clause is going to follow the same basic pattern, too. Even if it's just an accusative plus an infinitive, well, that's still subject and verb, right? The subject will come towards the beginning of the clause, and the verb is going to be at the end. And that means that you could get verb bunching, where you have verb, 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 and they're all from a series of nested clauses in that periodic structure, right? Well, in that case, a lot of Roman authors, sometimes they do that, but to make it a bit more euphonic, a bit more nice sounding, they would tend to use certain techniques to avoid that stacking of verbs all bunched at the end, which could be a little artless sometimes. They would employ chiasmus and anaphora and a whole bunch of other lovely rhetorical effects to make the beauty of the sentence really stand out. And something, too, that you'll notice on that page if you read it or if you listen to my audiobook version of it is how important the rhythm of the sentences, of the long and short syllables. Every single ancient author of any merit, including the ancient Greek ones, not just the Latin ones, was constantly aware of that. So you can really feel it in the expertise and the fluidity of these authors when they put together those sentences. So you can't, learn ancient Greek or Latin without knowing phonemic vowel length and syllable length as well, because otherwise you're missing most of the artistry that goes into it. At least that's my opinion.
And if you want to experiment with Latin word order in the wild, then you should come to the wild world of New York City. Living Latin and Ancient Greek in New York City will be the 15th and the 16th. I'll be giving a talk there in Latin, and you should come. You should practice speaking Ancient Greek or Latin. It's for beginners too. You can use the link that's in the description. I hope to see you there.
As for Ancient Greek word order, does it work a little bit like this? Is it, SOV? Is it something else? Is it something different? And basically this notion, the way that the Latin word order works, we can't even apply this structure to how Ancient Greek word order works. It is so completely different, but it's magnificent and it's fun and it's not that hard to understand. If you're interested, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video about that too. Now, all of that said about the default word order, is that what we'd actually expect to see? Not in the majority of sentences, because Latin order is flexible. Most of the time you're going to see not that order. You won't see the verb at the end because the Romans were conscious of the monotony of something like that. Plus it would be unmarked word order. The big difference is we're just not used to this, since we have a more fixed word order in English and many other languages that we speak, such as European languages. We are not used to the flexibility of using word order for emphasis. In English, for example, we have to apply that emphasis primarily with our accenting certain words, our tone of voice, our intonation, the cadence of a phrase. That is how we make one word stronger than another or weaker than another. But in Latin, it's all based on the word order. And an example that's given here on this webpage, this example is in the Allen and Greenough. And in this section, Allen and Greenough, what they did is they took the beginning of Caesar's Gallic Wars and they showed you every time we have a word that is in some emphasized position. The subject at the beginning, so the beginning is a strong position and the end is a strong position. So the verbs, which is the most important thing, if that's not at the end, that means that something's being emphasized. Either the verb is being emphasized by putting it elsewhere, or something else needs to be strong, so it's at the end of a clause. So we see Gaul, in the widest sense, is divided into 3 parts. So the end of this phrase, partis tris, I don't know why it's partis tris here. That is the old-fashioned accusative, but it's partes tres in all the codices I've seen. Anyway, I'll just say it as given here. In partis tris, divisa, est omnis divisa. So the verb here, of course, asks the verb to be, the copula. Does that have to come at the end like I asked at the beginning? Not really. The copula more frequently will avoid the end than will automatically be gravitated towards the end. So already there's something that's kind of breaking the rule, at least with the copula. But divisa and est, in any case, that is the verb. Is it at the end of this phrase? No. What does that do? It emphasizes the thing that is at the end. Gallius omnis divisi in partis tris, partes tres. Quarum, una incolunt belgae. Incolunt is the verb. We could have quarum, una belgae incolunt. That would be a phrase, a clause that is neutral, unemphasized, that's the regular word order, but incolunt belgae, putting that at the end of the phrase, we are emphasizing belgae. And look, we have a sort of, it's epiphoric, I'll call it, where the ending of every clause has a kind of emphasis. Belgae, aliam Aquitani. So we're contrasting belgae and Aquitani. Tertiam quipsorum lingua Celtae, Celtae, also contrasting belgae, Aquitani, Celtae. Nostra Galli appellantur. So in that, nostra Galli appellantur, the Galli is the subject, so Galli, nostra appellantur would be completely out of context of this sentence, could come at the front, but it's not. The verb is at the end, so the appellantur is not especially emphasized or marked. But the nostra is first. Why? Well, it makes sense in the context of the sentence. Ipsorum lingua Celtae, nostra, however, it contrasts the two things. So everywhere we see a word that is in a strong or emphasized place or out of its default word order, it gets emphasized here. And I encourage you to go through this or listen to my audiobook where you can, in fact, hear and feel all of this. And because that's the problem too, I guess that's happened to a lot of us. If we just are exposed to the word order of Latin like this, and it's translated in a way that it doesn't have, bolds and italicizations and things where the words are being emphasized, because Caesar's doing a lot of special emphasis here that we don't even notice, quarum una incolunt belgae, of which one of them they inhabit the Belgians. So, and we might not even feel that is emphasized in a different way. So the problem that can occur to us when we get exposed to just a lot of really good input, even from original authors like this in Latin, is we may not notice this because a default word order, a really simple word order that is the unmarked, unemphasized one, we might not even notice it. Again, the reason being, especially for English speakers, is that we provide emphasis through cadence, through tone of voice primarily, not through word order. Latin shows that emphasis through word order. And that totally unmarked, neutral word order, what is it? Connectors. Subject. Indirect object. Direct object. Adverb. Verb.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today as we unraveled a bit of the mysteries of Latin word order. Thanks, as always, to Ancient Language Institute, Arcus, for sponsoring this video. Come see my talk at Living Latin in New York if you like, if you can. If you're in the area, you should definitely do that. And and also, I'm just shamelessly plugging all of my things, but I also have, of course, the audiobook on Latin word order, link in the description. And thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and thanks especially to my Patreon supporters. Valete!